Ladies and gentlemen, friends of the channel, subscribers, channel members, patrons, and the garden variety haters, I know that there's one question on your mind. How the hell does Tom get his hair to look like this? I know, it's amazing. In all seriousness, it is currently 6 a.m. Eastern Time, and I have to be honest with you. There's only a few things that would make me wake up this early. One being an old slice of pizza that was marinating nicely on the counter, waiting for me to wake up and eat it. Number two would probably be aliens landing in my backyard. And number three, news from China. And today we have number three, massive news about Alibaba and the rest of these Chinese companies listed on New York Stock Exchange and the NASDAQ. Now, as you remember, back in the day, the Donald signed this ambitious legislation essentially saying that, hey, if you Chinese companies don't play ball with us, we're going to kick you out from our exchanges. Now that legislation, even though it sounds like a 5-year-old made up the name, Holding Foreign Companies Accountable Act, maybe even the Donald himself came up with the name, probably, I don't know. Even though the name is kind of redunculous, the legislation itself is very serious, and it addresses a major problem. The Chinese companies are presenting data in their financials to potential investors in the US stock exchanges, the New York Stock Exchange and NASDAQ. However, there is no supervision from any US entity. There's no compliance to US standards as far as the quality of these numbers being presented. Essentially, the Chinese are saying, well, trust us, our numbers are good, but they're closing off their books from US supervision. Now, rightfully so, the Donald basically said, well, if you're not going to let us check the quality of the numbers, we're going to kick you out from our exchanges. Simple. And that makes a lot of sense. However, the Chinese never played ball with it because they gambled on Grandpa Joe softening up and being nice and all globalist and just basically letting it slide. In fact, they went on record saying, well, we're sure we're going to work it out with Joe when he gets elected. And they gambled on the wrong horse because it turns out that Grandpa Joe is a crazy grandpa with a freaking shotgun. My name is Tom Nash, and I quit my corporate job as a senior financial analyst to break down companies for you. If there's one thing you need to know about me, I don't take bullshit from anybody. Now, Joe Biden isn't wasting time in getting into fights. He's already in the midst of a major crisis with Putin and Russia, and now he's starting another one with China. Whatever happened in Alaska did not stay in Alaska. Now, the SEC adopted the actual legislation, which is a huge surprise because everybody expected Joe Biden to essentially phase out this little thing and work it out with Chinese, but it's been adopted. And now the big question on everybody's mind, what's going to happen with Alibaba and the rest of these Chinese companies? Should you be worried? Of course, the prices will go down based on these negative catalyst news, but what's going to happen long term with these companies? Because as you know, this channel, we don't do swing trading, day trading. We're long-term value investors based on fundamentals. So is this thing actually going to get Alibaba and the rest of the Chinese companies delisted? Well, not necessarily. Beyond the FUD that you're going to see on all sorts of these YouTube channels and mainstream media basically crying about these dramatic results. And I'm not going to lie, I'm probably going to participate in that myself with a very dramatic, like, Home Alone thumbnail, reacting to this. But in all honesty, this isn't a huge deal. Let me explain where this legislation is going to be completely non-problematic and where I think the Chinese companies will have a little bit of a problem. But in any case, there's something you need to understand here. This legislation only says that if they don't comply with these requirements for 3 years in a row, then they can be delisted as kind of a punitive reaction to that. So in the worst case scenario, we're talking about 4 years down the line. At least a year from now and then another 3 years. So it's not like they're getting delisted tomorrow or next year, only 2023. I mean, this is really a long ways away. In fact, I honestly feel that this is the hardball politics that Joe Biden actually is known for. I know that everybody sees Joe now at his old age and he looks like a nice, gentle grandpa. But Joe Biden, even though he has been known to say some stupid stuff here and there, I mean, he's actually a very hardball politics guy. And you can search the internet, there's a lot of examples. I think that he sees this as a leveraging tool. Essentially, this legislation is going to get the Chinese to buckle up and basically they'll reach some sort of an agreement. But it's much easier to get to a favorable agreement to the US when you have this legislation in place because it sets up a lot of leverage for the Americans to use here. So I don't think they want to delist the Chinese companies necessarily, but they want to scare them into compliance, which I think will actually happen at the end. Something will have to give, And I think the Chinese want the US money more than the NASDAQ and the New York Stock Exchange want the Chinese companies on their stock exchanges. That's just my theory. Beyond the fact that I don't think the Chinese companies have any real issue with opening up their books. The problem is with the second half of this legislation, which I think where they'll have an actual issue with. Let me show you. Well, everybody's talking about the whole, well, they don't want to open up their books. I don't think that's the problem. The problem is that this legislation requires something else. I'm going to read you this bit from a Seeking Alpha news article. Basically, what's the Holding Foreign Companies Accountable Act? The measure would kick foreign companies off American stock exchanges if they fail to comply with US auditing standards for 3 years in a row. And this is the part we already talked about in this video, but now I want you to really pay attention to the second half of this paragraph. Read it with me. The rules also require firms prove to the SEC they are not owned or controlled by an entity of a foreign government and to name any board members who are Chinese Communist Party officials. Now that is major, especially given we know what's going on with Alibaba. We know that Alibaba has been pretty much nationalized by the Chinese government, allegedly, in my opinion. Not saying that that's what happened. It seems that Alibaba was nationalized. Nobody knows where Jack Ma is. I think that Alibaba, as well as other companies, especially the ones who are known to have strong connections to the Communist Party in China, will have a major issue with this part of the legislation. What you need to understand that the likelihood of their financials being fake is very, very low because they're audited by one of the big four companies in every single case. Either EY, Deloitte, KPMG, or even PwC. It doesn't really matter. These are multinational companies with global standards. After what happened with Arthur Andersen, as well as what happened with Wirecard, nobody wants another disaster on their hands. Any one of these major big four companies knows that if any dirt comes out of China and they didn't catch it, they're going to have a major story to deal with. In fact, if you remember, Enron took down what used to be the biggest accounting firm in the world, Arthur Andersen. So I don't think that's where the pain is. I do think that the pain is with the Chinese government being connected to these companies. There is where I think the problem will be, but I think it's a bargaining chip. I think this legislation is essentially to work out some sort of a deal where the Chinese government and the SEC, by extension of the US government, can actually coexist on US stock exchanges without threatening each other. That's what I think is going to happen. If you ask me, if you do believe in Alibaba long term, this isn't a huge deal, but I do expect a major price drop because of these bad news. I personally don't invest in Chinese companies for a multitude of reasons, for moral reasons, for volatility reasons, and it's my own choice, but you can do whatever it is you want. I think Alibaba is going to take a hit today, probably for the rest of the week. Think about it this way. Alibaba has already went through the worst of it. They literally made a human being disappear and all the greedy investors kept buying the stock. And again, this isn't a moral judgment. I'm not saying it's good or bad. I'm just saying if you are comfortable in investing in Chinese companies and if you like Alibaba, this thing is not a huge deal long term over the course of the next 2 years because this is a negotiation tactic between two governments. This thing shouldn't change your opinion about the company because I honestly think no Chinese companies will get delisted. And you know what? That's just another example of why long horizon value investing is good for your soul, your psyche, and your emotional well-being. Because as you just saw, it's not a huge deal for people like that. If you're a swing trader, you're going to have a tough day today. But again, it is what it is. By the way, I just started a new feature. If you go down to the pinned comment below, there's a link. You can book a one-on-one call with me, 30 minutes to an hour. The link is going to be right there. I'm doing it through Clarity. I'm just getting started. So far, we did 3 calls. It was amazing. If you want to take part, click the link and I'll see you there. And, whenever we get a chance to talk. Thanks again for our channel members and the patrons for making this happen. You guys have been awesome. This has been Tom Nash, allegedly. I'll see you guys in the next video.